All right, all right. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Masterful Conversations podcast, where we learn about leadership from the stories of men who have served or are currently serving as Worshipful Master of a regular lodge of free and accepted Masons. I am Brother Matthew Wagstaff, a proud past master of Eureka Lodge number 36 in Rochester, New York, along with Brother Mark Alexander, who's also a past master of Sons of Kings Lodge number 123 in Brooklyn, New York. We both hail from the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of New York, where Most Worshipful Gregory Roshan Smith Jr. currently presides as our Grand Master. We appreciate you taking the time to tune into the show. We hope that you hear something that will inspire you to take positive action in your lodge and in your personal lives. And so, without any further ado, before we move any further, a quick disclaimer.
The information shared on our show is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The views and opinions expressed do not express those of any Masonic Lodge or Grand Lodge. It's important that you do your own research and consult with the appropriate officers in your jurisdictions about any information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we move forward, today is a special day in our history. Past Master Alexander.
Yes, today actually is the anniversary of when Prince Hall and the 14, Motor 15, was first initiated into the craft on March 6, 1775 or 1778. It's a little controversy with that, but the day is right, March 6th. So that's the celebration in which started off Prince Hall Masonry in general. So we take this time to celebrate and remember that time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Past Master Alexander. So today is our birthday. It could be considered Prince Hall's birthday. So we appreciate being able to have this day as our first episode, and we are certainly happy and appreciative to have our brother, Past Master John Hill Jr. here to be our first guest on the podcast. And so I'm going to briefly introduce Past Master Hill. I could probably be here for about 20, 30 minutes introducing Past Master Hill for all that all he does and all he has done for the craft. But I'll give a brief summary of Past Master Hill. So Past Master Hill is a past master of Eureka Lodge number 36 here in Rochester, New York. He is also a Right Worshipful, so he's a special deputy emeritus of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of New York. He's the past president of the Prince Hall Temple Associates. He can elaborate a little bit more on what that is if he would like to. And he's also received the 33rd degree of the Ancient and Scottish Rite in Masonry. His years served in the East were 1997. I don't forget how old I was in 1997, and also in 2003. So he served 2 terms as Worshipful Master for those 2 terms. So with that, certainly want to open up with the first question and speak from the heart, be candid, tell it like it is. First question is, let's share a little bit about your time in the East. Give us a little bit of background. So, what was the environment like in the craft? How big was the lodge at that time? Any current events that were worth noting?
Thanks. It's absolutely an honor to be here with you both as you engaged in this endeavor. Excited for the things that you both are doing in the craft and adding this podcast to it. My days in the East were good times. I enjoyed my time in the East. I had started in the craft in '84. Probably became a little less active for a few years in the early '90s, and then re-engaged. I came back. I was treasurer, junior deacon, went straight to junior warden, senior warden, worshipful master as a path. Enjoyed all the time that was there. When I was taking the time off, it was because I had a little one, and I was trying to manage that balance of life and make sure that I was investing the right amount of time with her. So that had a little bit to do with becoming a little less active in the craft. We were a little under 100 members at the time, which in my opinion is about right-sized for Eureka. We're the only lodge in the city of Rochester, New York, and 100 men tends to be a good number for making sure you're getting the right amount of dues. You know, the craft tends to be, you know, some men who are just financial, some who you don't see, and then there's the active few, right, which tends to be 20 to 33%, right? And if you can get that number up to 100 and you've really got 20 to 33 men who are active, you can really do the many and several things that you need to do. So, you know, during my time, both years, it was, we were pretty much right-sized for what we needed to do and be. I will say the reason my years were split, when I was coming up through the East, one of the things that used to happen pretty regularly is when we had our mid-year event and our general session, the past masters would always congregate in a room and we'd all kind of sit and break bread and those kind of things. And one of the things that was kind of tradition, and one of the things the past masters told me was, you really need to serve 2 years. The first year, you don't know much, you're kind of groping in the dark. The second year, you know enough so you can be productive. So it was one of those things it was suggested to me strongly that you do 2 years. When I did my first year, I was super engaged. One of the things I was very proud to say was, for the whole tenure of being Worshipful Master, I worked on Masonry every day. And whether it was holding meetings, doing committee meetings, writing letters, visiting, whatever, I did something for Masonry 365. And it was hard. And by the end of the year, I was like, no, maybe this isn't going to work for 2 years. But I promise I'll come back and do my second year. So that's what I did. And then when it was time to come back, had a crucial conversation with then past Master Richardson about, you know, getting back in line, doing my second year, and made that leap to get my second year in. It was a little bit more challenging, and I think one of the things I learned that I share with people is, you know, part of being a good Worshipful Master is having strong relationships and being in a place where you've got current understanding and knowledge of everybody in the craft, around the craft, in the community, and taking those 6 years off put a dent in some of the relationships, right? Just, I hadn't been to some people's houses, they'd moved, I'd go looking for them in places, just kind of lost a little bit of touch during that time. And so it was a little bit more challenging my second year than my first year, because I had really built up to the first year wanting to be Worshipful Master and doing it well. And so, you know, as we're kind of articulating, you know, what it takes to be Worshipful Master in the craft, right? One, it's all about relationships, right? If you get the relationships right, all the rest, beyond a little bit of planning and vision, all the rest kind of falls into place, because you need to be able to pull on the resources of the organization and know people's skills and talents and what they value and don't value in order to do the job well. And so, yeah, those 6 years in between put a little bit of a, I'm not sure what he's doing now into the conversation, right? Or I'm not sure if he's still at company XYZ, right? And so it just took a little bit more energy to make it work. But, you know, both years were great. You know, we had successful annual programs. We have a Thanksgiving ball in November. They both went off super well. We have a community event in July, a cookout normally. During my years, we held a golf tournament also when we were doing it. And, you know, they all went went very well. Our community service, we were supporting the Martin Luther King Day program in the city and providing ushering services. We started the Have a Heart campaign back there for one of the years. We did the Red Kettle campaign with the Salvation Army, supported some of the local schools. So, we were doing what Masons are supposed to be doing, learning and growing and providing community service. And so it was all good. It was all good.
That's excellent. Excellent. Can you remind us, just for like historical context, do you remember who the Grand Master was under both of your administrations?
Sal Wallace for both, I
And
think.
both? Yeah. Mm. Yeah, he did serve 12 years, so
Yeah.
that was a long time. I
Yeah.
actually was talking to a brother today about that relationship piece to the same thing as far as being master. You definitely have to know, the brothers behind you and things like that, and your lodge in general to get things to function at its fullest capability. That's very important. And just as general leadership, you need to know that, in any organization and stuff like that. Um, to that point, what would you define as effective leadership?
Wow, there's lots of things to effective leadership. Um, I think one, you've got to understand the depth and breadth of the organization. And so, you know, one of the reasons we have a progression through the chairs is everyone allows you to learn a little bit something about the craft, right? When you're doing the steward's position, it's, meeting people, serving people while you're there. Masters of ceremonies, you put a little bit more emphasis on some ritualistic work, um, meeting brothers who are coming through the door. The deacons, definitively ritualistic work for the senior deacon, for the junior deacon, guarding the good door, taking the pass from everybody who's coming in, and you know, getting to press the flesh and kind of meet and know and recognize everybody who's coming through. I also think it's valuable to um, sit in the treasurer's seat, because understanding the finances of the organization is a good thing. If you don't sit in the treasurer's seat, pay attention. It's good to sit in the secretary's seat to understand the paperwork and the administrivia of the organization, which is, a well-functioning lodge is managing that piece and also managing the communications both inside the organization and external to the organization. So those are good. I think when you're sitting in the junior warden space, you're in charge of all the programs, and it is the formal opportunity to make sure that you meet and greet everybody in the organization, be it selling them tickets or working with them on programs or checking on things. I think as senior warden, it is the year that you are really supposed to be engaged with all of the members. I had the uh, benefit of having a senior warden who liked to pick up the phone. When I was senior warden, picking up the phone is not my thing, but I did it to the best that I could, right? But I think when I had my senior warden, past Grandmaster Dougal was my senior warden, and he made my year as Worshipful Master go very well because he actually connected with everybody. He picked up the phone, he talked to everybody, and he would let me know who was sick and shut in, or who had needs, or who had something good going on in their life, so that I could focus on making sure I reached out to them when I need to, but not necessarily the day to day. But every senior warden should be making sure that they're staying connected to all of the lodge members, attending as many functions as they can, with the sisters, with the lodges in your district, going to grand session. It's the time when you formalize those relationships so that when you sit in the East, you're not making them, but you're using them, right? And then the leadership piece, once you do get in the East, right? I think one of the big things is that the craft has high expectations of a worshipful master in terms of his responsiveness to what's going on in the craft and his follow through. If you say you're going to call somebody at 5 o'clock, you got to call them at 5 o'clock. If you say you're going to be at the lodge to open up at 3, you got to be there at 3, right? If you say, 2 months from now, I'm going to send you a letter, you got to send the letter 2 months from now, because falling short of expectations is what causes difficulty in the craft, right? And so one of the things you do as a leader is you set expectations properly, and then you do what you can to follow through, right? And if you set expectations and don't follow through, that's when difficulty kind of comes in. I think another part of leadership is definitely always communications, right? Keeping people well informed. I had the personal benefit of participating with the Frederick Douglass Toastmasters Club, which was actually founded in Eureka Lodge number 36. I was one of the founding members. And so I spent some time learning how to handle public speaking and extemporaneous speaking and those kinds of things. And I think that benefited me well, either when in the public or sitting in the East. I think the other thing about being a good leader is you got to do some amount of planning. And even in the planning, I think a good leader has delegated all of the day-to-day work, and a good leader is always ahead of the craft, right? You know what's coming up in a month. You know what the plan is several months down the road, and you're making sure that things are being put in place to handle when it gets to a day-to-day activity, allocating the work, making the relationships, talking to the hotels, talking to the church, talking to whomever, right? You're putting all those things in place so that when it gets to be the day-to-day thing, that's not where your energy is. You're always kind of ahead of the group. So planning, having that vision, making sure that things are in place to make the day-to-day happen properly is kind of a good leadership strategy that you've got to be, right? If you're spending a lot of time in the day-to-day administrivia of the organization, you're not leading, you're participating, sometimes following, but you're not leading, right? So that's my story for leadership today. Ask me again tomorrow. I'll give you a different answer.
Yes, I mean, this is a quick follow up on that delegation piece. It was great that you have or had a senior warden that was really active and was willing to sort of step up and do his thing. Did you encounter any gaps in any, you don't need to name any names, but did you encounter any hiccups or any gaps in your ability to delegate in terms of men being able to be available and really show up and meet your expectations?
Well, so there's a balance around that, right? I mean, one of the things is and his name may come up again a little bit later, but I learned from Clint Strickland. Clint Strickland um, was a past master, a man who had the art of building a relationship. And when he needed something, he'd walk up to you, throw his hand around the shoulder. Hey, Brother Hill, let me tell you what I'm thinking about. This is what I need you to do. And he had this great charisma about him for getting people to agree to do work and then getting them to agree to the point where they would really do it. I tried to mimic that when I sat in the East or any other leadership position. Men have lives, lives get in the way, life happens, and you've got to make kind of adjustments. And so, yes, there were times people said they were going to do things. I was disappointed they didn't. And, making the adjustment just was something you need to do. The craft isn't perfect. The men in the craft aren't perfect. Things get missed. And I, as a leader, as much as I kind of talked about, being responsible and opening the doors on time and meeting objectives, I'm sure I missed some too, right? But I think I and the people around me at the time, we had relationships enough that said, everybody was doing their best, knew they were doing their best. And when somebody failed, there were ways to recover, right? If I could not open the door at 3 o'clock, like I said, I could pick up the phone, call somebody and get somebody there at 3:15.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because I had relationships. I knew who was home and who wasn't. I knew who had a key and didn't, and that's the piece, right? You really need to know enough about what's going on in the organization and whose skill sets and what they're doing so that when problems do resist, you know how to contact people and get them to help you out in the spaces that they are. and they're willing to do it because they know you've done it for them in the past, and or you've just kind of built that rapport. And so, I don't think anything major stands out, although, I would say part of the reason I was doing something every day was some of that was solving those problems, right? Everything wasn't clean and peachy all the time, but they all worked out, and nothing severely limited the work that we were doing.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So, moving on to the next sort of question here is, since you've been out of East, you've been busy. You've been very busy. You can talk about Prince Hall Temple Associates or anything else you want to talk about. You've been writing many books, most recently in the last, I will say, decade or so, probably even before that, but it feels like in the last 10 years, I've been more aware. I have one of your books here called Expectations When Joining Prince Hall. So anybody that's listening, if you want to pick this up, I would highly recommend you get in contact with Past Master Hill. Now that you are out of the East, can you talk a little bit about how you show up as a leader now in the craft, and also how you collaborate with the Worshipful Master, the current Worshipful Master, so that he may not feel threatened or like you're stepping on his toes?
Well, I'm not sure I always accomplish the task of not being threatening and not stepping on toes, although that's never the goal, right? But everybody has their own agenda and things that are kind of driving them. And I will say, just for context, one of the things that almost every worshipful master hears is nobody can tell you what it's like being a worshipful master, right? It's just different for everybody because a worshipful master responds to so many external things that are happening in and around the lodge that he doesn't have control of but needs to respond to, right? A death in the craft, a invitation to speak at a church function, a member of the craft who was supposed to render a report and isn't available to render the report, right? You're just kind of adjusting to all of those things. I think my goal, being out of the East and being a past master, which means past, right? No authority, no, just past.
Mhm.
But my thing is to be there, right? To share my expertise, to share my information, and be a reliable source of information, right? And that was just, it's normally a function of the fact that I've built relationships with all of the men who have passed through the East and in the craft in general. We've had super conversations on lots of topics. They've seen the work that I've done. I try and do good work and true work, and be responsible and reliable for the things that are there, right? And I just always make myself available to Worship Master in the ways that he needs. I save a lot of paper, which is kind of not good for my household, but I can also go through my personal archives and give people examples of things that have happened in other administrations. But mostly, I just try and make myself available. And then I do the thing that every past master, every member of Grand Lodge, right? Every past master is a formal member of Grand Lodge. And our responsibility is to make sure that the Constitution and statutes of Grand Lodge are not disobeyed and are followed appropriately. And so I've taken the time to read, understand, to know and understand, and maybe to some chagrin and maybe to some thanks, I make sure that we don't, for lack of knowledge, not follow the Constitution and statutes. Now, if I tell you what to do and you decide to do something different, I don't know. I can't help you there, but I can tell you what you could and should do. And then, I am never offended if I share information or advice and you choose not to take it. And it doesn't turn me off not to come back and do it again until you tell me, Brother Hill, you're too much for me. That's okay. And I'll just wait for the next worshipful master and start all over again, right? But generally it's being open to being helpful and share the knowledge I have, right? And for all of us, it's just love of the craft that makes me show up to all of the meetings and all of the functions and all the things we do and how I spend my time. So that's it.
Being that Matt, you was worship master the last 2 years besides this year, 23 and 22, along with myself. We was classmates together. And so, and Brother Hill, Past Master Hill, is in your lodge. How did your relationship work with that to this point?
My relationship with Past Master Hill,
Yeah, as far as, you know, him giving you advice and things like that. And
man, he was all man. I was all like that. No, actually, no. That there's a reason why Past Master Hill was the first man that I thought of
Mhm,
for our podcast. Definitely a mentor of mine in the craft, someone who I highly respect, and he walks the talk. And so,
mhm,
as we know in our craft, as in many organizations, there's a large contingent of folks who like to speak of things, and
mhm,
there's a smaller contingent of folks who actually do the things, and follow up on things. And not only can Past Master Hill articulate a vision and a sort of a thought and suggestions, he can also execute on those things and help you execute on those things and be very resourceful. And so I don't know how he feels about us, but I feel like I had a fantastic relationship with Past Master Hill
Absolutely. Yeah.
during our 2 years. Definitely saw him as my conciliaires, if you will, from the Godfather, sort of like go to him with if I need any advice on how to handle a certain situation. And certainly someone who I could confide in. So I had a fantastic 2 years with him as my past master, and definitely appreciated him.
Thanks. It was good.
And as worship master, you definitely gonna need those past masters for that. I had past master Derek Pritchard and past master Fitzgerald Boyce, Carlos George. I have a few of them, but definitely those two were my go-tos for things to this nature. And speaking of on that go-tos and past master Hill, who was your mentors as when your time in the East or just in general?
Wow. I think I think an early mentor was Henry Beeson, who was the treasurer in our lodge, and I actually took over the treasurer's role from him. And I was just enamored with the quality of work that he did and the way he kept the books and kept organized and devoted his time. So I very much respected him and his work. I kind of mentioned Clint Strickland a little bit earlier, just for his relationship building, right? I mean, he knew everybody, was friends with everybody, and he knew how to ask for things to get done, right? I think one of the things we struggle with as a craft is we don't ask for enough, right? We need money, but we don't ask for money. We need time, but we don't ask for time. We need access, we don't ask for access, right? We try and do it all ourselves in a very insular way. We've just got to get better about asking for the things that we need. And Brother Strickland was great at that and appreciated that about him. I joined the organization in '84, and the then Worshipful Master was Carl Days. And Carl was the example of a man who would just open his home and open his heart to you. And so, when I was studying, we'd study at his home. Um, Great friends with him, his family, wife, everybody, right? Because I was passing through his doors on a regular basis, right? And I think spending time with the men in the craft is something we don't do quite as much as we used to. And it's valuable. Again, it all comes down to relationships in the end. And he was just really good at that. I think my person who comes to mind ritualistically was Eddie Chase, and he was actually the dean of my class when I came in. And Eddie just knew his work and worked on knowing his work. You could see him studying. Back in the day, Eureka Lodge had a building over on Holzer Street. We had a public bar on the first floor. Our lodge room was up on the second floor, and Brother Chase, you could see him studying on the first floor and on the second floor because that was just part of what he did, right? And so I kind of admired that about him. Um, uh, Another mentor, probably three, I'll call them all at once, right, was Past Master Larry Cresswell, Past Master Larry Brown, and Past Master James Frierson. They were the ones who were leading those conversations at mid-year and at grand session to talk about what's the future of the craft, what are we doing, talk through the young men who are kind of growing up in the craft and give them guidance and set direction and tell them, you need to read this book, you need to go to this event, you need to be part of Toastmasters, that whole kind of 9 yards. And so they were always very um, very supportive and open to sharing Masonic ideals of brotherly love, relief, truth, kind of thing. They just kind of embodied all of that. I'll say Grandmaster Saul Wallace was an inspiration. You know, the things that he did for the craft in his many years, I think I've come to the personal reckoning that, you know, Saul was just like us, an ordinary man. But he was an ordinary man who got us to vote for him in office 12 years. And a lot of things don't happen if you're only in the East, Grand East, for a year or even two, right? It just takes energy and time over a long duration to get some big things done. It's because Sal had that vision and dedication to task. He was very good, and Sal was very good about managing the crowd. And and one of the other things I learned from Grandmaster Solomon Wallace is build relationships with the stars, because he had a great relationship with them. And if things were going wrong in the craft, he would call the ladies that were attached to the craft to help kind of
Oh, yeah.
work
I
through
don't know, Past Master Hell. You got to get
some of that stuff, right? I mean,
no.
he was just really good in that space. And then the last person that I'll kind of mention, just because he was just a super guy, and I was always so pleased to be in his company. He's a brother out of Buffalo. It was Wilbur Banks, and Brother Banks was just a Mason's Mason, right? And loved Masonry. He was just an upright man in Mason, and you know, he put forth the energy. He talked to you about Masonry and talked to you about life. He was just enthusiastic about life, and it was contagious, and just kind of loved being in his presence. So that was me rattling off a few. So there are many more for sure. I could do this all day. But
Gotta love Past Master Wilbur Banks. Poor Will, they call him.
yeah.
He remind you too. 40 years, young man. 40 years I've been in this
That's it.
craft.
Yep.
40 years.
Nice.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So we got just a couple more questions. I mean, this has been very eye-opening. I didn't realize the relationships you had with some of the brothers that had passed on, because I know from looking at some of the old rosters and even some of the old dues cards that are still laying around in the lodge, some of these names. So I appreciate you sharing and providing that connection. That actually starting the dots are connecting in my own personal head.
Sure.
I got a question about if you were to go back into the East. So this will be my last question, and I'll pass it to Past Master Alexander. Well, if you were to go back in the East in 2025, let's just say hypothetically, I know this is not on your radar. Like you are not.
Not at all.
I know you're not trying to
at
go back.
all.
I
But
know.
okay, well,
So
I can be hypothetical though. Go
so
ahead.
you know, our worshipful master, don't worry.
Nobody's coming for your head.
If you were to go back, into the East, in this new day and age, you know, what would you focus on?
Probably a couple of things. One is finding ways to get us to spend more time together, right? Um, I think as we have kind of grown to develop efficiency, trying to get in and out of the lodge, and we've got so many other things we can be doing, I don't think we spend enough time together as men. And finding ways for us to spend more time together by holding more events, more study classes, more, cigar sips or whatever, bowling events. But I just don't think we spend enough social time together to establish relationships. I probably also encourage brothers to spend more time in each other's homes. Um, just shooting the breeze or holding study classes or have Masonic study groups or book clubs, but just spend more time in each other's homes, right? Because I think it would be valuable for all of us, and specifically for the families of Masons, that we don't just show up under sickness and distress circumstances, but we're building relationships, and seeing family members is hard if you're only doing all of your work in a lodge room. And so spending time, trying to get people to spend time together would be it. And I think the final thing is I would raise dues, because I think we do our best to try and keep our finances at the point where we can just maintain, right? And I think we should be doing more than just maintaining. And so we've either got to raise dues or invest in more programming. And I'd rather invest in higher dues and have programming for social reasons and not for fundraising reasons. So that would be it. So now I know nobody wants me to go back into East next year.
No, no. You do a great job as our advisor. We much appreciate you. Definitely.
Happy to do it. Yeah.
I definitely do understand those points, especially with the dues. I mean, if you look back into the history of what brothers pay for dues, it was really higher. It seemed like a little bit. I know I had a example of a Trinity chapter in Queens, and I think when they first started, I think their dues was like $15 or something like that. But they left it like that for a long time. But when they started, $15 was equivalent to a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah, so they had to sacrifice much more in order to keep that chapter going.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something to look at into when brothers think about it that way. My final question, and it deals with something to the point in which you just mentioned, was about the family. When you were going into the East and during your time in the East, of course, it takes a lot of time away from your family. And you mentioned before that, you had your daughter and you spent some time away in order to get her nurturing going and stuff like that. So how did it affect your family? How did you make that balance between the craft and get prepared for going into the East?
Well, I don't think it affected my family. There was definitely time away, but
Hmm.
there was never any question about what my priorities were,
Hmm.
right? If there was something that needed to happen at home took priority. Uh, I kind of I kind of filled my discretionary time with Masonic activities,
Hmm.
which kind of took me away, spent time. But my daughter was with me. She's met at the time. She had met all the brothers in the craft, and they've several have stories about her playing in the corner here or reading books over there or those kind of things, right? Because she was with me. And I think having children in the lodge building is an important thing, right? Having children around, making noise, being children, but also seeing men conduct themselves in a right and just manner is good for everybody. Um, and so there was never that concern, because, you know, my daughter had asthma, and if there were an asthma attack, everything got dropped work, Masons, church got dropped because that was my priority, right? And so there was always that, right? I was the emergency caregiver and made sure that I was kind of taking care of that at the highest level. And so that's kind of what my role was. I was the dependable, responsible person. If things kind of were not happening on schedule, then I would do what was necessary to kind of make ends meet and accomplish the tasks that needed to be done. I will say one other thing about family. One of the things I did when I was Worshipful Master was I wrote my communications as a 8-page magazine that I wanted the spouses to read. And it talked about things other than just coming to a meeting, who's our sick and shut in, and those kind of things. But it talked about bigger things that we wanted to do, why we wanted to do them, things that were happening in the community, and those kind of things. Um, and and I will say, going back to the dues piece, um, because I had written a document, it was shareable among uh, the family, and they were picking it up. It was also a good thing because I had uh, wives of brothers sending in their dues checks because they saw the notice and they responded in ways the brothers didn't, right? And again, I think it's relationships are important, and I knew the women and their spouses, and we had relationships, and so when they saw things kind of come in from the lodge, my name on it and those kind of things, they knew they could read it because at some point in time across the several months, I was clear to tell everybody as I was traveling to their several homes and places and those kind of things, that when I send this communication to your house, and it was a book, it was folded over, address put on it, so it was open. You could see what it was when it came in, right? And so they would kind of see it. And I told them, you can read this. This is not the hidden mysteries of the craft. You can read this. I want you to read this. I want you to know what your husband's doing. I want you to know some of the positive things we're doing as an organization. I want you to know. And, in a couple of instances, I know some of the children in the house read it, kind of thing, right? And so, again, I think there are things we can do to make sure that families don't feel neglected because their husbands, significant others are in the craft, that they know good things are going on and they know that they're included in the messaging about what's going on. So that's my other thing about family that I think is worth talking about here today.
Definitely. Man, you got me thinking about that 24-inch gauge, man. It's just like how in the world? Because very active worshipful master myself, but I'm just like, how in the world do you fit it all in? And some of us are fortunate enough in this new day and age to be able to work from home, and still it's hard to fit it all in. When you like right here, you have all this stuff at your fingertips. I imagine if you are like going into an office or going into a job where you got to kind of be outside, it's just tough to be able to have the family, the work, craft, the outside of the craft social life. If you got other friends, it just can be a
Yep. But it's all
interesting
about
balance.
priorities, right?
Yeah,
And being true to your priorities and having people that kind of understand what your priorities are, right? And how you're making decisions about how you're spending your discretionary time as well as your mandatory times, right? And having a good network around you, having decent conversations with a significant other or spouses and those kind of things, that you're going to be investing in this space, right? And having people in your life who kind of recognize what masonry means to you and allowing you the space to do that, but also knowing that their needs can be met, right? Somewhere in a sociology class, um, I heard the definition that um, a well-functioning family is one where everybody gets their needs met, and that should be your goal, right? And allowing everybody to have their needs met doesn't mean in most cases, unless you have a clingy significant other, right? Doesn't mean 24/7 availability and presence, right? But it does mean being there for the significant events in the life, whether they're planned or unplanned, right? It does mean making financial sacrifices when you are able. It does mean, turning off Masonry for a day, a week, a month, kind of thing, to go focus on other things, right? And so you've just got to kind of balance that stuff, right? And you and the craft need to kind of have that same kind of understanding, right? They need to know you're dedicated enough to the craft to say, I'm not going to be here for May and June. Just got other things to do. Allocate out the things that you needed to do, and they're happy and excited for you that you're kind of off doing other things, right? And truly receptive when you come back in July, right? But you got to establish all of that in place in advance, right? You can't be unreliable and then show up and say, and I'm taking May and June off, right? And expect everybody to be happy about it.
Mhm. Well, Brother Hill, definitely was a pleasure interviewing you. And you gave us a lot of different points and things to think about and to keep in mind, particularly things like building relationships, uh, keeping the family engaged and let them know what's going on, having a social relationship with your brothers in order to build that bond. Those are definitely key things that we need to know. Brothers need to keep in mind. Also, like what you said, sitting with the treasurer, sitting with the secretary, things like that. Those are important little details that brothers don't think about when it's time to be worship master. And I want to definitely thank you for bringing those points out. Do you have any last words at this time that you would like to say?
The way that I opened, I'm just truly excited for the work that you both are doing. I think it's great. I think it's good to see in past Master Wagstaff's vernacular execution of ideas, because we far too frequently have ideas and lots of conversations, but we don't execute um, to those um, to those conversations. And so it's really good to see you guys um, bring forth this podcast. I'm wishing you much success. I'm hoping that there is great learning through this process, and go get them. Thanks.
Much love, much respect. Definitely. So we will be back with another interview with another brother soon. So stay tuned to the Masterful Conversations podcast. Past Master Hill, it's been an honor and a privilege. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Mine. Thank you.